The night my sister proudly announced she was expecting baby number 4, everyone at the dinner table applauded. Then my mother smiled, looked straight at me, and said, "Perfect. You'll stay home and raise this one while they get back on their feet." My father nodded as if the decision had already been made. My sister laughed and called it good practice for when you finally have your own kids. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I simply stood up, packed one suitcase, and left. At 8:17 the next morning, an unknown number called. "Good morning. I'm calling from the police. My name is Rachel Carter. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my life, my family had one simple rule. If my older sister needed help, I was the help. It didn't matter whether it was picking up groceries, watching the kids for an afternoon, driving someone to an appointment, or canceling my own plans. The answer was always the same. Rachel will handle it. At first, I didn't mind. I loved my nieces and nephew. Emma was 7, Noah had just turned 5, and little Lily was 3. They were sweet kids who deserved every bit of love they received. But somewhere along the way, helping became expected instead of appreciated. I worked remotely as a cybersecurity consultant, which somehow convinced everyone that I was always available. Mom would call, without warning. "Can you keep the kids for a few hours?" Those few hours usually became an entire day. Sometimes, two. Whenever I mentioned deadlines, Dad would shrug. "You work on a computer. You can do that anywhere." My sister, Vanessa, never even asked anymore. She'd text, "Dropping the kids off in 20 minutes. Thanks." As if my agreement had already been given. I'd spent years convincing myself it was temporary, that eventually everyone would respect my time. I was wrong. Everything finally came to a head during Sunday dinner. The entire family had gathered at my parents' house. Halfway through dessert, Vanessa stood up smiling. "I've got exciting news." Everyone looked at her. "We're having another baby." The room exploded with applause. Mom immediately started crying happy tears. Dad hugged Vanessa. Even the kids began cheering because they thought babies automatically meant another party. Then Mom turned toward me with the biggest smile I'd seen all evening. "Well," she said, clapping her hands together, "that settles it." I frowned. What settles what? "When Vanessa goes back to work after maternity leave, you'll stay with the baby during the day." For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. Then Dad nodded. "It makes the most sense. You already work from home." Vanessa laughed. "Think of it as training. By the time you have your own kids, watching for won't even seem hard." I looked from one face to another. No one had asked me. No one had even considered that I might have my own plans. They had simply decided my future while I sat at the same table. I took a slow sip of water before answering. "Your baby deserves loving parents who choose to raise them." The room became completely silent. I gently set my glass down. "But that responsibility doesn't belong to me." Mom's smile disappeared instantly. "So, you're refusing to help your own family?" "I'm refusing to let someone else volunteer my life." Vanessa crossed her arms. "I can't believe you're being this selfish." I didn't argue. I quietly stood, drove home, packed a single suitcase, left my apartment for the night, and silenced my phone. The next morning, at exactly 8:17 a.m., an unknown number appeared on my screen. I answered. "Good morning," a calm voice said. "This is Officer Daniel Brooks with the County Police Department. I need to ask you a few questions about yesterday evening." I sat up straight the moment I heard the officer introduce himself. My first thought was that something terrible had happened to one of the kids. "Is everyone okay?" I asked immediately. "Everyone is safe," Officer Brooks replied in a calm voice. "This isn't an emergency. I just need to clarify a few things." I let out the breath I'd been holding. "What happened?" He paused for a moment before answering. "We responded to a welfare check at your parents' residence early this morning." My stomach tightened. "A welfare check?" "Yes. A neighbor contacted us after seeing 3 young children outside without an adult nearby for a short period during a family disagreement." I closed my eyes. "Are they okay?" "They're perfectly fine," he assured me. "One of the parents returned almost immediately, and no one was injured. Our visit was simply to make sure everyone was safe." Relief washed over me. Then he continued. The reason I'm calling is that several people at the residence stated you were supposed to be supervising the children. I blinked. I'm sorry, they said what? They told responding officers that you usually watch the children and that you unexpectedly left. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I never agreed to watch them. I understand, he said. That's why I'm calling. I opened the messages on my phone. Yesterday evening, they informed me, without asking, that I would become the full-time caregiver for my sister's new baby after maternity leave. And your response? I politely declined. I scrolled to the final messages I'd sent before leaving. I also told them I was leaving and would not be returning that night. Would you be willing to send screenshots showing those messages and the timestamps? Of course. Within 2 minutes, I'd emailed everything. The family group messages, my final text, the timestamp showing I had already left before the incident. A few minutes later, Officer Brooks called back. Thank you, Miss Carter. That confirms the timeline. So, am I responsible for any of this?
No.
His answer came without hesitation. You clearly communicated that you were leaving and never accepted responsibility for supervising the children. Based on the information we've reviewed, you have no involvement in the incident. I thanked him before ending the call. For the first time since leaving my parents' house, I felt completely certain I'd made the right decision. That peace lasted less than an hour. Mom called first, then Dad, then Vanessa. By lunchtime, my phone had recorded 18 missed calls. Finally, I answered. Mom didn't even say hello. Do you realize how embarrassing this has been? She demanded. The police came because you abandoned us. I stayed calm. I didn't abandon anyone. You've always helped before. I helped when I chose to. Vanessa grabbed the phone. If you'd just stayed one more night, none of this would have happened. I quietly answered. If caring for the children was so important, their parents should have arranged it before assuming I would do it. Neither of them responded. That evening, just as the house finally became quiet again, another call came through. This time, the name on my screen made me stop. Aunt Margaret. And judging by the first thing she said, someone had finally told her only half the story. I answered Aunt Margaret's call before it could ring a second time. Rachel, she said, your mother told everyone you walked out and left the children behind. Something about that doesn't sound like you. Tell me what really happened.
So I did.
I told her about Sunday dinner, about Mom announcing my future without asking, about Dad agreeing before I had spoken a single word, about Vanessa joking that raising 4 children would be good training. Then I explained the only sentence that seemed to matter. I said no. Aunt Margaret was quiet for several seconds. That's all. That's all. And they expected you to become free childcare because you work from home? Yes. She sighed. I think your father forgot something. What? Being available doesn't mean being responsible. By that evening, Aunt Margaret had spoken with several relatives who had only heard my mother's version of events. This time, they heard mine too. For the first time in years, no one defended the idea that I should put my own life on hold simply because I didn't have children. A few days later, my brother-in-law, Mark, called me. His voice sounded tired. I owe you an apology. I waited. I should have spoken up when everyone volunteered your time. There are kids. They're our responsibility. It wasn't a dramatic speech. It didn't need to be. It was honest. Vanessa called the next evening. I was angry, she admitted. But I shouldn't have assumed you'd always be there. I love your children, I replied. I know. And I'll always enjoy spending time with them. She paused. But only when I'm asked, not assigned. I understand. A week later, Mom asked if we could meet for coffee. She looked older somehow, less certain. I shouldn't have made decisions for you, she said quietly. I convinced myself that because you've always helped, you always would. I smiled gently. I'll still help when I can. Hope returned to her face. Then I added, but help given freely is a gift. Help that's expected becomes a burden. She slowly nodded. I never thought about it that way. I know. Over time things improved, not because everyone suddenly agreed about everything, but but because expectations were replaced with conversations. Now, when my family needs help, they ask. Sometimes I say yes. Sometimes I say no. And both answers are respected. The funny thing is, saying no that night didn't break my family. It finally taught them something they'd forgotten. Loving your family doesn't mean surrendering your future. The strongest relationships aren't built on obligation. They're built on respect, honest communication, and the freedom to choose kindness instead of being expected to provide it.